Hi, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all tonight. Guten Abend alle. Willkommen zur heutigen Lesung und Artist Talk. Es ist unsere zweite Lesung und Artist Talk im Rahmen von dem Projekt Tamistad. Es ist ein Lesezyklus, der stattfinden wird von Oktober 2021 bis 2023. Was ist überhaupt Tamistad? Was heißt Tamistad und woher kommt das Wort? Tamistad ist eine Wortschöpfung aus Tamistad und Amistad. Tamistad bezeichnet die zensurierte Literatur aus Sowjetunion und Osteuropa, die im Westen während des Kalten Krieges publiziert wurde. Das Wort Amistad bedeutet Freundschaft und Zuneigung. Das Projekt Tamistad nimmt diesen Neologismus als Leitfaden und fokussiert damit auf die Literatur, die außerhalb Österreichs herausgegeben wurde, aber doch einen Bezug auf Menschen und ihre Lebenswelten in Österreich hat. Im weiteren Spiel mit Neologismen wird das Projekt durch 4 Zyklen wie folgt gekennzeichnet. Der erste Zyklus, Ne Nomad, richtet sich an die Autorinnen, die aus irgendwelchen Gründen ihren Wohnort, ihre Heimat nicht verlassen oder nicht verlassen haben. Der zweite Zyklus, Nomad, ist den sogenannten Ortlosen, den Autorinnen, die ihren Wohnort oftmals wechseln und die durch das Nomadentum ihre Inspiration schöpfen, gewidmet. Der dritte Zyklus, Nomad ne Nomad, des Projekts Tamistad, spricht diejenigen Autorinnen an, die sich keiner der beiden oben erwähnten Gruppen zugehörig fühlen oder sich in beiden Gruppen gleichzeitig wiederfinden können. Der Fokus im vierten Zyklus, Nomansland, ist den Autorinnen aus Bosnien und Herzegowina gewidmet. Also das ist jetzt Teil von diesem Zyklus. Dieser Zyklus steht jenseits der 3 oben erwähnten Zyklen und ist dennoch mit ihnen verbunden und von ihnen durchdrungen. Das Projekt Tamistad ist eine Fortsetzung bzw. Weiterentwicklung der vorherigen literarischen Projekte Ditirams und wird, wie gesagt, in der Zeitspanne von Oktober 21 bis Dezember 23 durchgeführt. Die Projektidee enthält die Lesungen als einen wichtigen performativen Projektteil, wird aber auch durch die geplanten Artist Talks erweitert. So, das kommt jetzt alles noch einmal nur auf Englisch und dann werde ich unsere 2 Gäste vorstellen. So, welcome to the second reading and artist talk of our project Tamistad. Tamistad is a word that is made up of the words Tamistad and Amistad. Tamistad refers to the censored literature from Soviet Union and Eastern Europe published in the West during the Cold War, and the Spanish word Amistad means friendship. Austria, its cosmopolitan capital of Vienna in particular, is home to many people from other countries. Their connections and relations with their countries of origin are multifarious and have to be examined through the prism of arts and culture. At the same time, literature from other parts of the world is of great significance for the cultural growth of Austrians. The goal of the project Tamistad is to support this two-way relation, facilitate and shape intercultural literary exchange, as well as to make physical borders permeable through literature and encourage the audience to step over them. In this regard, it is important that the exchange does not take place within a single cultural space, but to venture across its boundaries. Therefore, we would like to invite authors from different parts of the world who are willing and able to contribute to the exchange in the spirit of global good neighborhood. The project comprises 3 cycles, each with a particular focal point. The first, titled Ne Nomad, focuses on the authors who, for whatever reasons, do not leave or have never left their country. The second, titled Nomad, is devoted to the placeless authors, those who often changed or have changed their place of residence and derive inspiration from nomadism. The third cycle, titled Nomad ne Nomad, focuses on authors who see themselves as belonging to neither or both of these two groups. The focus of the fourth cycle, titled Nomansland, is on authors from Bosnia and Herzegovina. This cycle is separate from the other three, but it is also bound up with them. The Tamistad series of readings is a continuation or further development of Titeram's previous literary projects. The project idea revolves around the readings, but will be broadened by the planned artist talks to facilitate artistic and cultural exchange. So now, after I told you about our project on the long term and parts of it, today we have two guests, the author Lejla Kalamujić and the translator of the book Zovite Esteban. So we will be reading texts in three languages. So Lejla will start with the original in Bosnian, then Jennifer will read in English, and then I will read in German. But first, before we start reading, I would like to present these two ladies. So Lejla Kalamujić was born in 1980 in Sarajevo, where she took a degree in philosophy and sociology. She is the author of 3 short story collections, the 2008 Anatomija, osmijeha, Anatomija of a Smile, then Zovite Esteban, Call Me Esteban, from which we will read today, which appeared in 2015, and the last one, Požuri, izmisli, grad, Hurry, Make Up a City, which was published this year. The book Call Me Esteban won the 2015 Edo Budiša Prize, awarded by Istria County in Croatia for the best regional short story collection. In 2020, she published a collection of plays titled Šake, pune, oblaka, Fistfuls of Clouds. Her stories and plays have been translated into several languages. Welcome, Lejla.
Thank you.
Jennifer Zoble translates Balkan and Spanish language literature into English. She teaches writing and translation in liberal studies at NYU and is teaching at NYU Florence for the 2021-22 academic year. Her translation of Mars by Asja Bakić was selected by Publishers Weekly for the fiction list in its Best Books 2019 issue. Call Me Esteban, her translation of Zovite Esteban by Lejla Kalamujić, is forthcoming or is already there from Sandorf Passage in September 2021 and was undertaken with support from the New York State Council on the Arts. So now I will leave the word to the author and she will read one of her short stories from the book Call Me Esteban.
Thank you all for coming. We decided that maybe the best is to start this evening with reading, so I will read one short story called Čekajući golubove. Tata je volio golubove. Nakon mamine smrti nas dvoje smo se vratili u porodičnu kuću na Vratniku gdje smo živjeli s nanom i dedom. I golubovima. I pokojom mačkom koja bi se noću prikrala u avliju, sklupčala i podmuklo prela ispod golubarnika. Dedi baš i nije bio drag takav suživot. Perje, zrnevlje, smrad posvuda. Ali trebalo je izgraditi život nanovo, sklepati ga i skrpiti kao taj golubarnik od stare žice i dasaka. Dedo je danima radio u garaži, znojan, u tijesnoj majici ispod koje mu izvirivao nabrekli stomak, sate je provodio pilajući, šmirglajući, zakivajući. Golubarnik je postavio na vrh zida okrenutog prema bašti. Imali smo velike merdevine, ali meni je penjanje bilo zabranjeno. Pašćeš i ubićeš se, odgovarala bi Nana na moje molbe. Zato su moja uspinjanja bila tajne avanture. Šunjala sam se pazajući da drvene prečke ne zaškripe pod mojim nogama. A mačke? Zatrčale bi se i skočile na zid. Potiho bi njihove kandže kvrckale po izbočinama fasade. Obrušavale bi se u jaucima. Samo najispretnije bi se uspjelo uzverati noću. Poneki golub bi stradao. Ujutro bi ih tata nalazio krvave, poderanih guša. Smrt, tu neman, krili su od mene kao zmija noge. Sahranjivali bi mrtve golubove u bašti i prekrivali svježe razdarovanu zemlju lišćem. Tata u zoru hrani golubove raznim sjemenkama. Sipa im svježu vodu, oni piju, pa mokrih kljunova polete među oblake. Odlaze svi u isto vrijeme. Oni u slobodu, a tata u poštu, na posao. Mene bude nanin glas i miris hrane. Nana vječito na nogama, u starom radiju krčka se muzika. Nana zapjeva. Tako, kaže, radi brže i bolje. Dok miješa ručak na ringli šporeta, riba sudoperu ili briše prašinu sa nachtkasne, nižu se pjesme. Tako Nana vješto spaja život domaćice i snove pjevačice. Doručkujem u pidžami. Oči me bole od krmelja. Na bakrenoj taci nosim 2 namazane kriške u sobu. Sjedam na krevet, noge zavlačim pod jorgan, stavljam tacnu pred sebe i odgrizam velike komade hljeba. Žvačem sporo, gledam kroz prozor. Kad završim, oblačim se pred sobnim ogledalom. Za ram je zakačena fotografija. Na njoj je tata, u plavom radničkom mantilu, osmijehuje se. U rukama mu žice i kliješta. Tata uspostavlja telefonske veze, povezuje glasove. Slično kako golubovi u letu prespajaju svjetove. Čarape oblačim u trku. U bašti me čeka masivni kameni sto. Legnem na njega, raširim svoja krila i pogledom tražim golubove. Visokoletači buše oblake, prevrtači se okreću do besvijesti. Sati prolaze. Oči su mi utkane u nebo, u visine gdje kažu da žive onih koji više nema. Panika nastane kad spazim sokola. Skačem na noge, mašem rukama, zviždim i vičem. Ali moj glas se ne čuje gore u visinama. Trčim po Nanu i dedu. Sokol će pojest goluba, vičem. Dedo pohiti iz garaže, Nana se spušta niz basamake. Plješću u rukama. Nana govori pis sokolu. Kad se nebeska potjera smiri, sretno po golubove, dedo proklinje ptice, perje, golublja govna. Onda pita Nanu koliko je sati. Dok odlazi nazad u garažu, ona mu dobacuje. Sad će on, vidjet ćeš. U kuću ulazim kad sunce jurne na zapad. Miris hrane hlapi u zraku, radio je ugašen, zidni sat cokće. Sjenke se uvlače kroz prozore. Raskrivlim zavjesu i provirujem prema golubarniku. Samo je Miki tu. On je pećinar, odličan letač. Kad hoda malo se gega, onako kako se tata njiše kad se noću vraća kući. Vidi koliko je sati, a njega nema, počinje dedo. Sad će. Rekla je to i prije 3 sata. Možda se zadržao na poslu. U mehani on, znam ja, svaku noć isto. I tišina ima svoj glas. Neće mi u kuću večeras. Ne budali, kaže Nana. Sjenke bubre, s njima se kao mačka išuljam iz kuće. Vrata golubarnika su i dalje otvorena. Korak po korak uspinjem se na merdevine. Jedna prečka, druga, treća. Gore je tiho i bolje se vidi. Stojim tako i čekam da se golubovi vrate. Thank you. Maybe we will leave only this one.
Waiting for the pigeons. Dad loved pigeons. After Mom's death, the 2 of us returned to the family house in Vratnik, where we lived with Nana and Papa, and the pigeons, and a few cats that lurked in the garden at night, curled up and treacherously purring beneath the pigeon coop. Papa wasn't too keen on that arrangement. Feathers, crumbs, stench everywhere. But life needed to be built anew, cobbled together like that coop of old wire and board. Papa would work every day in the garage, sweaty, his plump belly protruding from under his tight t-shirt. He'd spend hours sawing, sanding, hammering. He mounted the coop high on the wall facing the garden. We had tall ladders I was forbidden to climb. "You'll fall and hurt yourself," Nana would reply at my pleading. That's why climbing was my secret adventure. I'd sneak up the ladder, stepping carefully so the rungs didn't creak. And the cats? They'd dart around and leap at the wall. Their claws would softly scrape its rough surface. Then they'd tumble down, howling. Only the nimblest prevailed in this nighttime ascent. The odd pigeon suffered. In the morning, Dad would find it bloodied, its throat slashed. But death, that fiend, they concealed from me like snake feet. They buried the dead pigeons in the garden and covered the freshly dug earth with leaves. At dawn, Dad fed the pigeons assorted seeds. He poured them fresh water, they drank, and then, their beaks still wet, they took flight among the clouds. Everyone headed off at the same time, the pigeons to freedom and Dad to the post office, where he worked. I was awakened by Nana's voice and the scent of breakfast. Nana eternally on her feet, music gurgling from the ancient radio. Nana would break into song. She said it helped her work. While she stirred the makings of lunch on the stove, scrubbed the sink, or dusted the bedside tables, the songs tumbled forth. Thus was Nana able to blend the life of a homemaker and the dreams of a chanteuse. I eat breakfast in my pajamas. My eyes sting from the crusty sleep. I head back to my room with 2 slices of buttered toast on a copper plate. I sit on my bed, legs tucked under the quilt, and set the plate in front of me, taking a big bite of toast. I chew slowly and gaze out the window. When I'm finished eating, I dress in front of the mirror. Tucked in its corner is a photo of my father, in a blue work uniform, smiling. He holds a pair of pliers and a spool of wire. Dad sets up telephone lines for the postal service, connects voices, like the pigeons connecting heaven and earth in their flight. I pull on my socks as I run out of the house. In the garden, the huge stone table is waiting for me. I lie atop it, spreading my wings and scanning the sky for pigeons. The high-flying ones perforate the clouds. The looping, turning ones whirl to unconsciousness. The hours pass. My eyes are tethered to the sky, to that high, high place where, I'm told, live only those who are no more. Panic descends when a hawk appears. I leap to my feet, wave my arms, shout and hiss, but my voice can't reach those heights. I race to get Nana and Papa. "A hawk is going to eat the pigeons," I cry. Papa hurries from the garage. Nana rushes down the stairs. They smack their hands together. Nana yells, "Peace," at the hawk. When the aerial chase ends, luckily for the pigeons, Papa curses the birds, the plumage, the pigeon poop. Then he asks Nana what time it is. As he makes for the garage, she calls out, "He's on his way now, you'll see." I go in when the sun streaks westward. The smell of food is dissipating. The radio is silent. The wall clock ticks as shadows slip through the windows. I part the curtains and peek out at the pigeon coop. Only Mickey is there. He's a rock pigeon, an excellent flyer. When he walks, he waddles a little, like the way Dad sways when he comes home at night. "Look at the time, and no sight of him," begins Papa. "He's coming now. You said that 3 hours ago. Maybe he got held up at work. He's at the bar, I know it. Every night the same thing." And the silence has its own voice. "He better not think he's getting in here tonight." "Oh, stop it," says Nana. The shadows lengthen. Like a cat, I creep out of the house with them. The door to the pigeon coop is still open. Step by step, I make my way up the ladder. 1 rung, 2, 3. It's quiet at the top, and I can see better. I perch there and wait for the pigeons to return.
Während ich auf die Tauben warte. Papa liebte Tauben. Nach Mamas Tod zogen wir 2 wieder in das Familienhaus nach Vratnik. Dort lebten meine Großeltern, Nana Safeta und Edo Nejad, und Tauben. Und die eine oder andere Katze, die sich nachts in dem Hof schlich, unter dem Taubenschlag zusammenrollte und hinterlistig schnurrte. Dedo mochte dieses Zusammenleben gar nicht. Federn, Körner und Gestank überall. Aber das Leben musste von neuem aufgebaut werden. Es musste zusammengeschustert und geflickt werden, wie dieser Taubenschlag aus Brettern und altem Draht. Dedo arbeitete tagelang in der Garage, verschwitzt und im engen T-Shirt, unter dem sein praller Bauch hervorschaute, verbrachte er Stunden mit Sägen, Schleifen und Nageln. Den Taubenschlag brachte er oben an der zum Garten zeigenden Hauswand an. Wir hatten eine große Leiter, aber mir wurde verboten, hinaufzuklettern. Du fällst noch runter und bringst dich um, sagte Nana jedes Mal, wenn ich darum bettelte. Deshalb unternahm ich meine Kletterabenteuer heimlich. Ich schlich nach oben und gab Acht, dass die Holzsprossen unter meinen Füßen nicht knarzten. Und die Katzen? Sie setzten zum Sprung an die Wand an. Ihre Krallen kratzten leise auf den Mauergewölbungen. Dann stürzten sie mit klagenden Miauen zurück auf den Boden. Ein paar Tauben mussten daran glauben. Am Morgen fand Papa sie voller Blut mit aufgerissenen Hälsen. Den Tod, dieses Ungeheuer, versteckten die Erwachsenen von mir wie die Schlange ihre Beine. Sie vergruben die toten Tauben im Garten und bedeckten die frisch umgegrabene Erde mit Laub. Im Morgengrauen füttert Papa die Tauben mit verschiedenen Körnern. Er macht das Wasser frisch. Sie trinken und fliegen mit nassen Schnäbeln in die Wolken. Alle brechen zur selben Zeit auf. Sie in die Freiheit und Papa zur Post, auf die Arbeit. Mich wecken Nanas Stimme und der Duft nach Hessen. Nana läuft unentwegt umher, das alte Radio dudelt leise. Nana singt. So könne sie schneller und besser arbeiten, sagt sie. Während sie das Mittagessen auf dem Herd umrührt, das Waschbecken scheuert oder den Staub vom Nachttisch wischt, reiht sich ein Lied in das andere. So verbindet meine Oma meisterhaft das Leben als Hausfrau mit dem Traum eines Lebens als Sängerin. Ich frühstücke im Schlafanzug. Meine Augen sind voller Schlaf und tun weh. Auf dem Kupfertablett trage ich 2 geschmierte Brote in mein Zimmer. Ich setze mich aufs Bett, stecke die Beine unter die Bettdecke, stelle das Tablett vor mich und beiße große Stücke Brot ab. Ich kaue langsam und schaue durchs Fenster. Danach ziehe ich mich vor dem Zimmerspiegel an. In dem Rahmen ist eine Fotografie geklemmt. Darauf lächelt mich Papa in seiner blauen Arbeitskleidung an. In den Händen hält er Kabel und Zange. Papa richtet Telefonverbindungen ein. Er bringt Stimmen zueinander. Ähnlich wie Tauben im Flug verschiedene Welten verbinden. Die Socken ziehe ich im Laufen an. Ein massiver Steinetisch wartet im Garten auf mich. Ich lege mich drauf, breite meine Flügel aus und suche mit dem Blick die Tauben. Die Hochflieger durchbrechen die Wolken, während sich die Purzler und Roller bis zur Bewusstlosigkeit drehen. Stunden vergehen. Meine Augen sind fest auf dem Himmel da oben geheftet. Dort, wo angeblich jene leben, die es nicht mehr gibt. Als ich einen Falken erspähe, werde ich panisch. Ich springe auf, rudere mit dem Armen, pfeife und schreie. Aber meine Stimme ist da oben in den Höhen nicht zu hören. Schnell gehe ich Nana und Edo holen. Der Falke frisst eine Taube, schreie ich. Edo eilt aus der Garage herbei. Nana kommt die Treppe herunter. Ich klatsche in die Hände. Nana ruft Ksch in Richtung Falke. Die Verfolgungsjagd im Himmel geht gut aus für die Tauben. Edo verflucht die Vögel, die Federn, die Taubenscheiße. Dann fragt er Nana, wie spät es ist. Während er zurück in der Garage geht, wirft sie ihm hinterher. Er kommt bestimmt gleich. Als die Sonne im Westen sinkt, gehe ich ins Haus. In der Luft verdammt der Geruch nach Hessen. Das Radio ist aus. Die Wanduhr schnalzt. Durchs Fenster stehlen sich die Schatten hinein. Ich schiebe den Vorhang auf und luge in Richtung Taubenschlag. Nur Miki ist da. Sie ist eine Felsentaube. Hervorragende Fliegerin. Beim Laufen watschelt sie ein bisschen. Ungefähr so, wie Papa wankt, wenn er nachts nach Hause kommt. Siehst du, wie spät es ist? Und er ist noch immer nicht da, setzt Edo an. Er kommt gleich. Du hast das vor 3 Stunden auch schon gesagt. Vielleicht musste er länger arbeiten. Der ist 100% in der Kneipe. Jede Nacht das Gleiche. Auch die Stille hat ihre Stimme. Der kommt mir heute nicht ins Haus. Er redet keinen Unsinn, sagt Nana. Die Schatten quallen auf. Mit ihnen schleiche ich mich wie eine Katze nach draußen. Die Tür des Taubenschlags steht noch immer offen. Schritt für Schritt klettere ich die Leiter hoch. Auf die erste Sprosse, die zweite, die dritte. Oben ist es still und man kann besser sehen. Dort stehe ich und warte auf die Rückkehr der Tauben. Danke. So after you heard the text, I leave the word to Jennifer, who will host the artist talk with Lejla.
And thank you all again for coming. So I have prepared a handful of questions for Lejla, and we'll just sort of see where the conversation goes, and we may end up reading a second story as well. So I wanted to start off by asking you to talk a little bit about the process of, I know that you wrote some of these stories at different times, that you didn't initially view it as a collection, that they came together sort of after the fact of writing them. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of, you know, the different stages of writing the stories, and then how you went about sort of conceiving of it as a grouping, as a collection.
Before this book, I published also a collection of short stories. So I was only experienced in writing short stories. And at the beginning, when I wrote the first, actually it's the last one in this book, this story, Return to the Stars, I still didn't have any clue what's going, is it going to be a part of something bigger or it's not. I just wrote it. After a few years, the inspiration was after some time I returned to my mother's grave, and then after that I wrote that story. And then maybe half of a year or even a year later, I wrote the first one about this typewriter to me, because I heard that news in media that the last fabric is going to lock down, so typewriters will be the part of our past. So I also wrote that story, and every other came after. And then somehow I knew that I have the beginning, I have the end, and then I was playing with this space in between beginning and the end. So it took me maybe 2 years, even maybe 3 years, to complete this. I still think that this is a collection of short stories. Every story is linked to another, but that they can also be read as separate, as a short story. So, because I'm saying this because many people now call this book like some kind of fragmented novel or something. I was writing it as short stories, but I linked them. Yes, that was maybe yeah. But also in the first collection, I also linked all the stories. But I don't see why it cannot be a book of short stories. Well, if you have something same and similar point, people think that it's necessarily a novel, but I think it's not the case every time.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
No, that's great. So one of the things that links the stories is that a version of you serves as the narrator for most of the stories, and is even named as such. You know, there is a kind of character of Lejla who appears throughout the book, and I was wondering about your choice to do that, to sort of very, you know, explicitly identify yourself as a narrator and sort of the sort of autobiographical dimension of the book, to kind of put that front and center. Was that something that you...
I had it with this story, Return to the Stars, because before that, whatever I was writing, it was not in this linked to my experience, my life, but also it always had been some issues that bothered me, but I never somehow put in literature my own life. And the experience of this story was completely different for me. And I think that it also brings me a new look to the writing. So after this story, I decided that I will do it in some other stories. So that's how this book is. At the end, that in every story I am writing about one part or one motive from my own life. So, but when I started, that was something new for me. So I decided to keep on just to see what I can get with this.
So one of the reasons why this question of how to categorize the book has come up is because, at least it's come up in the context of the publication of the translation in English, is because there's this perception in the US publishing market that readers are not particularly interested in buying collections of short stories, that novels tend to be the most sort of popular fiction genre, and so it's harder to sell, short story collections than it is to sell novels. And so I'm wondering if a kind of equivalent situation exists in the sort of Balkan publishing sphere, and Melisa, if you could even comment on whether that also in its own way exists in a sort of German language publishing sphere.
Also in our region, people are preferring novels, but it's not impossible to publish a collection of short stories, because now I have a third one. It was published recently, maybe a month ago. So everybody still expects from me a novel, a real novel. But after this book, I wrote Free Plays. It was like, why? Why are you doing that? Because if you will not make it in theater, why to write plays? But for me it was funny, it was interesting, so I did it maybe 2 years ago, and after that I have now a new collection of short stories. So, but for me it's not impossible to publish it, but there is some expectation that people are, because some people, they know that I'm also trying to write a novel. And now everybody asks me, okay, this is okay, but when the novel is going to be finished? So it's not the same. I think maybe it's even harder in US or in UK to publish a collection of short stories, but people also in Balkan now prefer a novel as a genre.
Yeah, I think generally it's true, the tendency that people read or prefer novels everywhere. But I think short story had a kind of big return the last couple of years. That the short story, also in post-Yugoslav context, became much more popular now than it used to be. And there are many now book collections of short stories which did win some prizes and became popular. So I think this is changing a bit, because for the most of the general audience, I think it's still novel, but people who read more literature, understand more about literature, also started looking into short stories more and more lately. So it's something that's becoming, I think, more popular lately. So, and I think it's in Europe it's the same. So in post-Yugoslav context and also here. But yeah, it's true, novel has this kind of fame, like the most complex genre or something.
Yeah, it's sort of the ambition that every fiction writer is expected to be sort of working towards somehow, right? Now that you mentioned that you have been working on a novel, though, I'm wondering I hadn't planned this question, but I'm wondering could you say anything about how you sort of map out a longer work differently from a shorter work? Like when you're thinking about the novel versus thinking about a short story, how that process is different?
It's process of changing, because now I need also adapt myself and my writing to a new form. Because after short stories, I told you I wrote 3 plays, and the language there is even more reduced. And now when I wrote the first version of novel, it was not enough. Now I need to, to put myself in completely different form and try to somehow, I don't know, to put myself in this, that I need to write more, but that it has not only just write more, but that still it has a sense, So yeah, it's for me. I think this story, when I was talking about Return to the Stars, it changed in that time my writing. Now this experience of trying to write a novel is also changing something in me, changing my way of writing. So it's a process of not easy. It's still learning, trying, but I hope at the end that I will make that novel.
I mean, I could see how that could be a challenge, because I think one of the things that's so remarkable about your stories is that you manage to say so much in so few words. I mean, these are not even just short stories; they're sort of like micro stories. They're very short, and they're so evocative and so effective with so few words.
Yes.
So to then try to kind of work in a longer form.
With a novel, it's.
So one reason that we chose to read this story that we just read is that there's actually a motif of birds throughout the entire collection. There's the pigeons from the story that we just read. There's a story that focuses on an owl. There are sparrows in another story. So two of the versions have owls on the covers, and the very first edition, the Bosnian edition, has a kind of image of a bird perched on a kind of telephone wire. So I wanted to ask you about that, how that motif kind of came into being, and how conscious you were of it, or not so conscious you were of it when you were pulling the stories together.
I wasn't conscious of it at the beginning, but then after a few stories in this book, I realized that I have birds very often as a motif, and then it didn't stop with this book. I also wrote about birds in plays now in these new stories. So it's something, probably birds are something that they're important to me. I really love birds, and it really happened. We had pigeons when I was a child. My father, and it was a common thing in our neighborhood. Maybe every house, or maybe not every, but most of the houses, people had pigeons. So I was growing up with them. So maybe it is not just part of my consciousness, but also unconsciousness, and I'm returning to them all the time. And I think that I'm still not, I didn't finish that process. They are still present in anything I'm writing and working.
I mean, they in each of the ways they show up in the book, I mean, they're always such a beautiful image. They do so much in the stories where they appear. Although it seems as though in all the stories where they appear in this collection, there is an element of death that accompanies the birds, or sort of like danger. The birds are kind of endangered in some way when they show up. So given, Melisa was talking about the nomad theme of the series, and so I wanted to ask Lejla about the influence of movement and migration, exile in your early life that you write about in some of the stories, as well as in your more recent life, travel. I know you've done some residencies in other countries, what living outside of Sarajevo or traveling has, the influence that's had on your life. So both when you were younger and now that you're older, like what movement and migration, kind of what role that has in your writing process?
Mostly I spent all my life in Sarajevo, but I was born during the Yugoslavia, and we had relatives in Serbia, in Croatia, in many other towns. So I was traveling a lot during my childhood, and then the war began, and I had this also that's one of the topics also in my stories. I left Sarajevo and I went with my mother parents to Serbia, and I was refugee for 2 years there, and then return back to Sarajevo, and that's what happened before. But when I start writing, after first book, not many things, nothing, actually almost nothing changed. I just had a book. But when I wrote Esteban, now I published the first edition, it was the end of 2015. And before that I had one residency in Pristina. And it was, I think, 2016, February, I came to Vienna because I was an artist in residence in Museumskvartier. And I remember, then I thought, okay, now I published second book. I had promotion in Sarajevo, and that's it. That's something like it's the end of the process. And now I remember that Selma wrote me email while I was there, and she asked me, would I be for that you and she that translated into English, and it was completely something new for me, translation. So that's how it started. And after that, maybe I won also this Edo Budiša prize, and published book also in Belgrade and in Zagreb. And I had many readings. So I again traveled a lot besides of residencies. So something like I can say that writing bring me back all those travelings that I had when I was a child. Because I had that experience, that then after that sometimes staying almost all time in Sarajevo, and with this book it changed. So yeah, traveling is also a big part of my experience and my writing, and today it's almost the way I live. Okay, now it's pandemic, everything is slow again, but till then I was in 1 year, maybe half time I was on a trip or a residential program or something like that.
I mean, in this collection, the city of Sarajevo features very prominently, both in your earlier, childhood and then up to the present. Well, not present, circa 2015. Sort of later life. Do you feel like being outside of Sarajevo, whether when you were younger as a refugee or more recently through these other travels, do you feel like that's enabled you to get some kind of perspective on the city that helps sort of shape your sort of depiction of it in writing?
Yeah. I wrote about the war many years after the war, so I think we always need some kind of a distance. So maybe about the present Sarajevo I will write in the future. So for me I need some time to make a distance and to see the whole picture. But I'm 40 now, and definitely Sarajevo is my hometown, and whether I stay there or go away, it will always be maybe one of the most significant topics in my writing. So yeah, that's we will see what's going to happen, but and where I will be, will I stay or go somewhere else? But I think Sarajevo will always be in my writing. Yeah.
How are we on time? Should we read another story or?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
The next one. Okay.
This is the story that immediately follows the story we've already read in the collection.
Uzalud je budiš. Sigurno je rekla nek me traži i vidi da me nema. Ta žena sa rukama deteta koju volim. To dete koje je zaspalo ne obrišavši suze koje budim. Uzalud, uzalud, uzalud je budim. Branko Miljković. Ležim u krevetu. Stišćem kapke, svrbe me trepavice. Umirujem zjenice. Pravim se da spavam. Pravim se da neću čuti galamu iz kuhinje koja samo što nije. Znam da hoće. Dedo će galamiti kad on dođe pijan, Nana će plakati, tetka će pobjeći u svoj svijet. U očima mi crno, kao duboko krastavo nebo u kojem se suše nikad ispunjene želje. Galama. Bila, prođe. Ljutnja se slila u korake. Bijesno škripe stare daske kuće na vratniku. Dođe tišina i s njom par koraka. Nespretno klijevaju ispred vrata moje sobe. Hajde, ulazi više, pomislim i dalje kroteći zjenice. Ležimo na leđima, na jastucima savijene male i velike ruke. Na njih oslanjamo svoje glave. Budiš. Govoriš sporo o svojoj mrtvoj ženi, o svojoj lijepoj ženi. Svako malo prisjetiš se da se ja nje ne sjećam, pa onda pojašnjavaš nadugo i naširoko. Kao i svakog puta, iz ormara u kojem i dalje vise njene stvari, vadiš jednu po jednu suknju. Teget, bijelu, maslinastu. Uzimaš ih vrhovima prstiju koji stišću u rub platna kao štipaljke, širiš ih i skupljaš, zagledaš, obavezno desnim dlanom zagladiš svaku, valjda skidaš prašinu. Ja u njih nikad neću stati, ne kažem. I dalje pričaš o njoj, o svojoj mrtvoj ženi, o svojoj lijepoj ženi. Kasno je. Glas ti je sve tiši. Riječi ti se rastaču na jeziku. Zapličeš, gubiš se. Dijete si koje zaspi ne obrišavši suze. Gledam te dok spavaš, nesvjesna da ću te jednog dana mrziti. Ne zbog tebe, to ne. Bio si derla uplakano i izgubljeno. Mrzit ću te zbog svih njih koji se izdiru i galame, koji te psuju na ulici dok je budiš. Mrzit ću te zbog dječjih nevješto skrivenih pogleda, njihovih ruku koje se međusobno gurkaju i štipkaju, zbog njihovog jedva čujnog smijuljenja dok igramo klikera, onda kad se na dnu ulice ukaže tvoje lelujevo tijelo. Soba se puni atomima ROH, kao obala vodom kad oslabi moć mjeseca. Ime moje majke miriše na alkohol. Udišem ga ravnomjerno dok zurim u plafon. Golubovi spavaju u kavezu. Sobu ćemo uništiti u godinama poslije. Sami ćemo guliti tapete, zatim pozvati molera da sastruže zidove do gola. Temeljito ćemo počistiti, kantu 30 litara natrpati šutom i jedva je odvući do kontejnera. Spuštajući se niz ulicu, po posljednji put ću osjetiti miris tvojih suza. Vukući se ka smetljištu, ponovo ću nas vidjeti kako ležimo s rukama na jastucima kao nekad. Gledamo u plafon, a ti je plačan budiš. Nju, svoju mrtvu ženu, svoju lijepu ženu. Mada ta ću već znati, mrzim te. Mrzim te jer je nebo duboko i krastavo i ti tu ne možeš ama baš ništa.
In vain you wake her. Surely, she said, let him search for me and see I'm gone. That woman with a child's hands whom I love. That child who fell asleep not wiping her tears, whom I wake. In vain, in vain, in vain, in vain I wake her. Branko Miljković, uzalud budim, in vain I wake her. I lie in bed, pressing my eyelids together, my lashes itching. I pretend to sleep. I pretend I won't hear the commotion in the kitchen that's about to begin. I know it will. Papa will throw a fit when he comes home drunk. Nana will cry. Auntie will retreat into her own world. Inside my eyes there's just darkness, like a deep, scabrous sky in which desires dry up, unfulfilled. The uproar arrives, then it's over, past. Anger cascades into footfalls. The old floorboards of the house in Vratnik creak wildly. Then silence comes, and with it a pair of steps. They linger awkwardly at the door to my room. Come on, come in, I think, my eyes squeezed shut. We lie on our backs. The pillows cushion our bent arms, large and small. Our heads rest on them. You wake her. You speak slowly of her, your dead wife, your beautiful wife. Every once in a while, it occurs to you that I don't remember her, so you explain in depth. As always, you pull skirt after skirt from the closet where her things are stored. The navy one, the white one, the olive one. You take them with fingertips that grasp the edge of the fabric like clothespins. You spread them out and gather them together. You inspect them. You inevitably stroke them with your bright palm to remove any dust. I know they'll never fit me. I don't say. And you keep talking about her, about your dead wife, your beautiful wife. It's late. Your voice grows silent. The words dissolve on your tongue. You falter, lose yourself. You're a child who falls asleep not wiping his tears. I watch you while you sleep, unaware that I'll hate you one day. Not because of you, that's not it. You were just a brat, sniveling, lost. I will hate you because of all the people who howl at you, the ones who swear at you in the street while you wake her. I will hate you because of the kids' clumsy sidelong looks, their nudging and pinching, their barely audible snickering when we play marbles, when your swaying body appears at the end of the street. Alcohol molecules fill the room like water flooding the shore at high tide. The name of my mother reeks of alcohol. I breathe it in evenly, gazing at the ceiling. The pigeons sleep in their cage. We'll demolish the room in a few years. We'll peel off the wallpaper ourselves, hire a house painter to scrape the walls bare. I'll clean zealously, cramming a 30-liter bin with the refuse and barely managing to haul it to the dumpster. Trudging down the street, I'll smell the scent of your tears for the last time. Dragging myself to the trash heap, I'll see us once again lying with our arms flung across the pillows. I watch the ceiling, and you wake her tearfully. Her, your dead wife, your beautiful wife. But by then, I'll already know. I hate you. I hate you because the sky is deep and scabrous, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Vergeblich wächst du sie. Bestimmt hatte sie gesagt, soll er mich durchsuchen und sehen, dass ich nicht da bin. Diese Frau mit den Kinderhänden, die ich liebe, dieses Kind, das eingeschlafen ist, ohne sich die Tränen abzuwischen. Ich wecke es vergeblich, 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 vergeblich wecke ich sie. Branko Milković. Ich liege im Bett, halte die Lider fest verschlossen. Die Wimpern kitzeln mich. Ich versuche, die Pupillen zu entspannen. Tue so, als ob ich schlafe. Ich tue so, als müsste ich den Lärm nicht hören, der gleich in der Küche losbricht. Ich weiß, was gleich passiert. Wenn er betrunken nach Hause kommt, wird Edo herumschreien, Nana wird weinen und meine Tante sich in ihre Welt flüchten. Hinter meinen Lidern ist es schwarz wie am weiten, verschorften Himmel, an dem die nie erfüllten Wünsche trocknen. Geschrei, da war es und geht vorbei. Die Wut ergießt sich in Schritte. Wütend knarren die alten Dielen des Hauses in Vratnik. Dann kommt die Stille und mit ihr ein paar Schritte. Unbeholfen halten sie vor meiner Zimmertür inne. Los, komm schon rein, denke ich, während ich weiter meine Pupillen bändige. Wir liegen auf dem Rücken, auf den Kissen verschränkte kleine und große Hände. Darauf betten wir unsere Köpfe. Du wächst sie. Langsam sprichst du von deiner toten Frau, deiner schönen Frau. Zwischendurch fällt dir ein, dass ich mich ja nicht an sie erinnern kann. Dann wirst du konkreter in deinen Beschreibungen, lang und breit. Und wie jedes Mal ziehst du aus dem Kleiderschrank, in dem immer noch ihre Sachen hängen, einen Rock nach dem anderen, einen dunkelblauen, einen weißen, einen olivengrünen. Du nimmst sie mit den Fingerspitzen, die den Saum halten wie Wäscheklemmern, breitest du sie aus und faltest sie wieder zusammen, schaust sie dir an und wie zwanghaft streichst du jeden von ihnen mit der rechten Hand glatt, wahrscheinlich um den Staub abzuwischen. Ich werde da nie hineinpassen. Das sage ich aber nicht. Du redest immer noch von ihr, von deiner toten Frau, deiner wunderschönen Frau, deiner schönen Frau. Es ist spät. Deine Stimme wird immer leiser. Die Worte zerfallen dir auf der Zunge. Du lallst, verlierst den Faden. Du bist das Kind, das einschläft, ohne sich die Tränen abzuwischen. Ich schaue dich an, während du schläfst. Noch ist mir nicht klar, dass ich dich eines Tages hassen werde. Nicht deinetwegen, das nicht. Du warst eine Rotznase, verwöhnt, verweint, verloren. Hassen werde ich dich wegen all der anderen, die herumbrüllen und zettern, die dich auf der Straße beschimpfen, während du sie wächst. Hassen werde ich dich wegen der anderen Kinder, die ihre Blicke schlecht verstecken, die sich beim Murmelspielen gegenseitig anstupsen und zwinken und kaum hörbar kichern, sobald am Ende der Straße dein schwankender Körper auftaucht. Das Zimmer füllt sich mit der ROH-Atomen wie die Küste mit Wasser, wenn die Kraft des Mondes nachlässt. Der Name meiner Mutter riecht nach Alkohol. Ich atme ihn gleichmäßig ein und starre dabei die Decke. Die Tauben schlafen im Verschlag. Ein paar Jahre später werden wir das Zimmer vernichten, selber die Tapete ablösen und dann einen Maler bestellen, der die Wände abkratzt, bis sie nackt sind. Ich werde alles gründlich sauber machen, einen 30-Liter-Eimer mit Schutt beladen und ihn kaum zum Container ziehen können. Wenn ich die Straße hinabgehe, werde ich zum letzten Mal den Geruch deiner Tränen in der Nase haben. Während ich mich zum Müllplatz schleppe, werde ich uns wieder vor mir sehen, wie wir mit den Händen auf dem Kissen daliegen, wie früher. Wie wir zur Decke schauen und du sie weinerlich wächst. Sie, deine tote Frau, deine schöne Frau. Aber dann werde ich bereits wissen, ich hasse dich. Ich hasse dich, weil der Himmel weit und verschorft ist und du daran so absolut gar nichts ändern kannst. Danke.
Should we take
Open,
questions?
yeah, maybe open the round for questions.
Comments, questions,
I have
observations.
So when you look at this book, and it's your second short story collection, how do you see it fitting into your trajectory as a writer? Did it change something for you as a writer? Did it did it open new questions for you, or like new stylistic questions? Like where does it fit in your development as a writer?
Mm-hmm. I think it changed my writing in that time. As I told, when I wrote the story Return to the Stars, I felt that something changed in my writing. I wasn't at the first even. I was not sure what was it about, but maybe that's the. It's also in a stylistic way, because I started to explore my own life, and I somehow understood that the best way of writing about life is to reduce things, so you also said it's these short stories are also micro short stories, and definitely it was something new in that time. And after this book I also write, maybe they are in this one, I wrote 3 or 4 additional short stories that are really similar to the collection, and now I think that I also need to make another step. That's what I was talking about, novel. And I think that now I need also to somehow to improve my writing. But in the time when I was writing Esteban, it really changed my writing in that time.
Excuse me, when I was trying to get myself attuned to this evening, I was browsing and I couldn't find many information regarding this translation. So what is actually behind the title? What does the Esteban refer to?
Yeah, first of all, I thought that the book that I will call the book Return to the Stars. And then after that decision, I realized that I have idea for a new story. And the name was Call Me Esteban. That story refers to Almodovar movie All About My Mother. And also about one Esteban, who was a character of Marquez' short story. And somehow when I wrote that story, I realized that it would suit the best for the whole collections, because in that particular story I'm talking about all the motives and topics that I'm dealing in this collection of short stories. So that's the reason. It's the name. Actually, it's the name of one story in this book.
So how would you answer the question?
Oh, I mean, very similarly.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that's interesting is that one way that the translation
It relates to the branches of your study, I guess, as a Hispanist and.
yeah, I suppose, but I hadn't actually read the Marquez story at the time that I'd seen the Almodovar movie, which has, you know, the son is named Esteban, but I wasn't familiar with the Marquez story until I read about it in this book. But one of the things that's interesting about this translation, the book as an object, is that the cover image veers from this other trend of bird imagery and takes its image from that story.
Yes.
So they decided to use an image that is an image taken from the end of that story. So that's sort of an interesting feature of this translation. But yeah, I mean, it's a very and also the English translation of the title of the story is very direct. I mean, it's Zovite me Esteban, Call Me Esteban. It was, you know, it was a very titles are sometimes the hardest thing to translate.
And Esteban in German, so it's
this was a really beautifully easy title for to translate for this book. So yeah, it's a wonderful story.
you might buy the book and then you can read it.
That's right.
Any other questions for Lejla, Jennifer? You can also ask in German or in Bosnian, and we can also translate.
I have a question, because your stories are so small. About the quantity, do you write a lot and then cut it down, or does it already come out? That's one.
I'm reducing stories. Sometimes I even want to write more, and when I'm reading, then I realize that I don't need many things. So till now, it's always process of cutting off, you know. So yeah, we will see. Is it going to be in another things that I want to write? But till now, it was mostly I write at the first time I write more than I'm cutting off some things that I think that they are too much that I don't need.
It definitely contributes to the translatability of the stories in English, for sure. Because I think, you know, there's been in English language contemporary writing, you know, there's been this sort of trend towards economy for a while, and so I think it's, you know, to be able to, because, you know, I have some close friends who are translators of Balkan literature too, but who've worked on authors, you know, of times past who wrote in much more kind of Baroque, complicated styles, and so I often get asked questions about, you know, like, is it how difficult is it to move from this language into English, and I've often answered by saying, well, because I've been focusing on contemporary literature that's been written in a style that's not necessarily, you know, a traditional style with shorter sentences and sort of more simpler syntax and, you know, kind of really, really economical kind of articulations and stuff. It's made it very, easy for me to translate from the standpoint of the working just with the language itself. But yeah.
Yeah, can I ask something also? There was because it's Dedo and Nana, and I was wondering how this is going to be solved in both English and German translation. So it was like Papa is Dedo, and then Nana stayed like Nana.
The story in which it becomes most complicated is the story Four Seasons, where all four grandparents are discussed in a single story, and so I had to decide how to distinguish one pair of grandparents from the other pair of grandparents, and so I made it Nana and Papa and Grandma and Grandpa. And then had to kind of carry those characters through in that way. And then the father had to be Dad in the story in which both the grandfather and the father appear. So that was a decision I made early on.
Yeah, because she has it in Bosnian, like Nana Dedo, and then Deda and Baka. Yeah, so. And this is like clearly marked also, like who is who, and then here they also kind of worked with the same, like English Papa and Nana, and probably Oma, Opa, something like that.
Right. So it was first translated to English and then the German.
Yeah, when did the German happen?
After your translation.
It was this year, right?
It was the book was published maybe a month before.
Here it says 2020.
Yeah, 2020. Maybe in March, at the beginning of the Corona pandemic.
Are there any other translations in the works?
It's also translated into Polish, and in our region in Macedonian and Slovenian, and now it's in the process of translation in Italian.
And Jennifer, would you consider translating that in Spanish?
Oh, no. I don't necessarily subscribe to the orthodoxy that one should only translate into one's first language, but I don't see myself translating into any language but English. I think that's where I have the greatest facility, so that's the only thing I would do.
But there are other translators who could do it in Spanish. So Lejla, maybe Spanish coming or other languages.
But I have something to add. Now I think that I have that I can now completely answer your question, because when you was talking about difficulty of translations, our traditional literature into English, I think that was the weakest point of my first book, because I was so influenced by our tradition, especially with Andrić and Selimović, and it was too much. And one critic told me that that time is over. You need to find your own voice. And I think that that's something that happened with this book. Somehow maybe it's really reduced, it's simple, but I think that I have found my own voice. That now that occurred to me.
I think you did, because once you read this book, I think one could recognize your story, another story that you don't know. I think I could definitely recognize your voice, your style, because it has something very specific. It's not, like general style, and it's something very specific for Lejla, and the motives that are repeating and this reduced expression. But everything is said. I think it's an admirable skill to say all you need in just a few words.
Well, it's both reduced but also very rich. It has like the strength of poetry when you read it. So it's very simple but also very layered at the same time.
And deep and poetic, and so it's simple but not banal in the way some people, when they write simply, can be. It's really layered and deep, like you say,
and very, very lyrical.
Yeah.
Which is why I think the whole conversation around, I personally get really frustrated when people, sort of trot out the sort of commentary about, people's resistance, the sort of public's resistance to reading short stories, and because I think it's such a particular and beautiful art to be able to write something that rich in such a small space, in prose. So, And I think there are a lot of people who admire it as well. So.
Yeah, and now actually a new trend is also a short story because people have like not that much of attention span anymore or time, you know. Yeah, to like start a novel and you have to continue. Right. So short story, you can actually read one, you can leave it, and in 2 weeks you can read another one. Right. So I think this is a form that is going to be even more popular.
Yeah, I mean, every few years there's discussion of a short story. I mean, when Alice Munro won the Nobel, there was like, oh, it's going to be a short story renaissance, you know, and then it kind of dies off, and then it gets picked up again, and then it dies off again, and yeah. But no, it makes absolute sense that you know, being able to kind of go in and out of the, you know. So, anyway.
Right. Any other comments, questions?
But publication in English, you told us already that it was for a time pretty successful, and perhaps you could also explain a little bit how it went with the translation. On the other hand, this connection or how is, for instance, this book, how was it perceived in comparison, maybe in our region and in US, and what are the similarities or differences, if you can compare this? I mean, both of you, I mean, how was it? I mean, I know you got also the prize for this book in Bosnia or
Istria, but this was regional.
Yeah.
so. How was the, you know, maybe this getting up or becoming famous in Bosnia and in US? Is there a possibility to compare, or you know?
Well, I mean, one thing that you could note about the translation is that it's being very explicitly marketed as a queer work. And I don't know if that was the case with the original, was it?
Yes.
It was. So that's a similarity.
Definitely.
And then how do you perceive that having influenced its reception in the local?
I think that partly the success of this book is because of many people from our region could connect their lives and their experience of war and after-war life with these stories. And also, yeah, this queer moment was interesting. It was, now we have many writers who are writing queer literature, but I remember when I published first book, it was not the case, but not so many years passed. Maybe it's in last 10 or 15 years, many things changed. So when I was starting with this, it was still something new, something. Yeah, I think it's still, you know, it's still something different that we used to. So that queer moment was also recognized. The war and yeah, I think that's two moments was the
Sort of like it said on the cover of the English version, sort of the search for identity. Yeah. I think this is something that a lot of people relate to. So the growing up, you know, looking for, you know, your own way, path, where do you belong, who am I? This is also something that I felt strongly inside, this sort of, in the vulnerable age of teenage, when you're a teenager and this all happens to you and you're kind of don't know where you belong, who you are. So I think this is also the moment that a lot of people can connect to, even if they're not from Bosnia or the war-affected areas, but just like, you know, who am I and what's going on, and somehow, for me, it was an important moment reading. Yeah.
But I have this also experience of reading in the region and abroad, and in our region people are really more interesting that I talk about my queer identity and my experience with psychiatry. But people in Austria, Switzerland and other countries, when was presenting the book, they want to know more about the war. So that's the difference I can experience.
Yeah, sort of something that they're not know about themselves, because there is also queer literature here, but in another context and times.
Yeah, I mean, we've only done, well, it wasn't even a joint event. I've done one event in the U.S. since the publication of the book. It was actually the week that it came out. I've done, over the 5 years I was working on the translation, I did a series of readings here and there while it was a work in progress. But they were usually part of group readings, or I was paired with another translator who maybe worked, like there was one reading I did where there was a translator from Czech, and I did a reading at my university that also consisted of other faculty readings. So I haven't done a lot of readings that were dedicated to this book specifically, or Lejla as an author, or our collaboration. And even the one event that I did last month, the same week that the book came out, which was a virtual event hosted by the Harriman Institute at Columbia University, was a group reading with several other translators. So none of the events I've ever done have really focused on kind of framing this book in a particular way, whether with respect to the war, or respect to its queerness, or respect to the sort of coming of age narrative, or anything like that. But I absolutely agree, and it's totally my expectation that this will have its parallel in the U.S. context, that people will find all of these different entry points for connecting with the book. And I don't have any evidence to support this, but part of me just kind of instinctively feels that perhaps readers in the U.S., who are absolutely familiar, there's plenty of queer literature accessible, local queer literature, but I have a feeling that people are now kind of becoming more interested in hearing queer voices from elsewhere, particularly when those voices are also telling other stories as part of their, accounting of their experience, their queer experience, So I think that curiosity has grown, and that all of these different dimensions brought together will ignite that curiosity even further in the readers.
Curiosity.
Curiosity, exactly, yeah.
Anything else?
There is one more aspect that is very interesting, considering the readings that are coming from our region. And as we said now, topic as war, or some typical history-based topics that are connecting our country to the authors, and also in connection with the public. This is one of the things. But then there was also, or there is still, this kind of perception of our authors in Austria as something exotic. Mm-hmm. So in that sense of being something very near, but then exotic, considering now Austria or Bosnia, and also taking the war as a subject that is kind of a stigma that was put on us, that has a kind of everlasting inspiration for, or I don't know how to, but for me those imaginary things that connect public with writers are also a little bit questionable, aren't they? I mean, to have war as a reason to buy this book, or to be interested, or to have this, okay, now we have something, exotic, or something that we don't have in Austria, but there is something there on Balkans. So, what is your perception, Lejla, maybe, do you have a feeling that people abroad perceive you as exotic literature or something that is like totally different, even though very near, like here in Austria?
I'm not sure about it. Because I was always reading in maybe not so far away from home, in Austria, in Germany, few times in France and Switzerland. So I'm not sure that they think that my writing is exotic. But the war is something that is. I think, I don't know, I'm not sure, but like maybe there is also expectation that we who experienced war recently in 90s write about it. Okay, in this book it is exactly like that. So they really, mostly they ask me questions about the war, how it was during the war, and maybe even more than now when I'm thinking about all the questions were not about the stories, there were more questions about my experience. Okay, they are everything is linked in the book, but people really want to know something more about the war. That's my experience.
Well, I think people have a lot of fascination for war. There is a fascination for war in any kinds of, like on political level, but also on personal level. And it's often, I perceive, a topic that is sort of fascinating for people, and also death and, I don't know, killings and all this kind of dark side. And what I wanted to ask you is how do they perceive the war? Is it only about the war, or do people realize about this, you being from a mixed family, from a Muslim and Serbian ethnical background, and that it's kind of, do people realize that level of your own identity, which is not ethnically pure according to the nationalist discourse, but kind of post-Yugoslav thing? Do they realize that when you're talking about Nana and Papa and then other grandparents and sort of, do they ask you about that?
No, it's
or
more
just about the war?
About the war, because those are some details people don't know or don't understand about the war in former Yugoslavia. That part of ethnical identities, it's interesting for our regional public. So many people, and even if our people who live abroad, they want me to talk about that. But people who don't have any connections with former Yugoslavia, I don't think that they really can understand what happened there. Yeah. They don't know these ethnical identities, differences. So probably I know that story is really hard to translate. Okay, when I said Nana I Dedo or Baka I Deda, everybody from our region will understand what I'm talking about. But in German or in English, it's not clear.
And often you say their names, Nejad.
Yes, yes. If you say the name,
Muslim.
So, but I think that's also something that might get missed because it's just like war in the Balkans, but then our people from our countries, former Yugoslavia, understand these small differences and this kind of, I don't know, post-national or mixed national identity or something that is actually really, really important, especially for people who are mixed themselves,
and this is a tricky thing because this book is not explanatory in this sense. There are not any story that I'm explaining. My father parents, they are Muslims, my mother are Serbs, and now it's in maybe I counted with some knowledge. So basically, when I was really writing these stories, I thought it's for the people who lived in Yugoslavia and who know what happened. So any other interest in this book was like for me, I didn't expect it. Really, I didn't. So
Yeah.
Sort of accidental margin.
I didn't understand. Yeah, I didn't expect it really.
But I think the fellow that he provoked an interesting, how do you say, dichotomy concerning this exoticism and the war, because we are, I could say, we are witnessing a shift in the paradigm, obviously, in the contemporary writing, because before war and exoticism for German speaking area it was Drang nach Süden, obviously, but for the English exoticism was Dracula with something that led to post-colonial literature, whatever, and what we are having today after the fall of Yugoslavia, somehow this exoticism is also, besides this interest for war as a texture, whatever, as a melting pot, a catalysator, melting pot or something, also brings us to placing Yugoslav experience into some sort of post-colonial experience, actually, because of the easily pointing into the Muslim thing at first, and then so you go. You know what I mean? Just a comment from my side.
Well, I think it's what you said, Lejla, about how the book isn't explanatory in terms of the context of like your family and your background. But I think one of the things that's nice about it, and maybe I have a kind of prejudiced view on this because of the fact that I do have some knowledge, so I am a slightly more informed reader than maybe the average U.S. reader would be. But I think that it's also not explanatory about the war, which is something that I think is really beautiful, and like all of these little moments where the war kind of asserts itself. I mean, one example of this I'm thinking of is in my favorite story, Das Tamistad, or Had I Met You in English, which depicts a kind of imagined encounter between Lejla and her deceased mother as a university student in a park, and having a conversation. And the way that the war asserts itself is in the street names having changed, and the street names have been renamed in this kind of post-war context. And so it's just this very subtle presence of that history kind of running through the story, and it doesn't get explained any more than that. And it's just understood that, because the mother died prior to the war period, she wouldn't understand why the names of the streets have changed, but it's really quick, it passes quickly. But I think there are many little moments like that throughout the book where the war is sort of in the background, but doesn't have to be fully explicated, and and I could just say from my own experience reading from the book over the years at different events, as I was saying before, nobody has ever really asked me to explain, to sort of flesh out that context, even when I've read stories that have explicitly mentioned the war. But a question that I get asked almost all the time when I've read from this book, when I've read from other books, is to explain the sort of evolution of like language policy, and because if the terminology of BCS gets used in reading my bio or in sort of framing the book, people are always like, okay, so help me understand what's the difference between Bosnia and Croatia, and then I'm like, we don't have the amount of time we would need to explain that, so sorry, we'll have to talk about it another time. So there's this interesting kind of like curiosity about this post-war terminology, but it's really particular to like this language idea, and I've gotten asked that a lot.
Yeah, I always tell them linguistically it's the same language and it's variants of the same polycentric language, but politically there are 3 or 4. And this is how I tell them, it's the same language linguistically from that perspective, from the political perspective there are 4 Montenegrinian now, and that's it basically. It's the simplest explanation I can give them without going into details. Yeah, but I have another question, because you have also Ljudoš Derka, one of your plays is also kind of based on Esteban and motifs and so on. But there you have the part where you explain where your grandparents' character explain we are Muslims and we believe in God, and the other ones are we're born Serbs, but we don't actually believe in it. So did that come from this confusion that people couldn't really understand, and needed to clarify, or
No,
for other reasons?
No. It's because I wrote it after Esteban, and it was again a new form, my first play, and actually it's somehow mostly linked to the story for season, but I wanted to show the fall of Yugoslavia through the fall of one family, and that was the question of my own identity, that I didn't know how else to bring that the question, who am I after everything? That's the reason they are presenting themselves. Okay, we were Yugoslavians, now we are Muslims, we are Serbs, and you are whatever you want to be. Yeah, but not because this, not. But I felt that in that moment, in that form, I need that for the scene. So that's the reason.
Yeah, because it was the easiest, I guess, way to just clarify some things in them, in the way that they just present shortly themselves. Yeah, right. You should also read the play Ljudožderka. If you like Esteban, you should read them. And the play was actually put into theater. Can you talk about maybe the play and also other things, other books and?
Okay, I can briefly say that after Esteban, I first book after that was a collection of 3 plays. First of them was this Ljudožderka, and I after that wrote 2 more. But Ljudožderka is the only one that was staged, and it was in that season right before the COVID pandemic, so it was staged maybe just few times. We'll see in the future, I don't know, but now we are thinking about staging the second one, Ugasimo svjetlo, but it's soon, still I'm not sure. Is it going to be possible?
And it was
So
also
that's-
successful, the staging of the play. As I
Yes,
read.
but it just stopped because of COVID, you know. It has
It was
3
in
or 4
Sarajevo?
in Zenica.
In Zenica.
In Zenica. That's all.
Did you have a question?
No, it was in between the discussion we recommended direction.
Sorry.
Okay. So that's it.
All right. So
Is that it?
Is that it?
I have one quick question.
Okay.
Since we were talking about staging, I wanted to know from each of you what would be your ideal staging of a reading? You know, I don't know. Maybe you would like to read in a forest, you know, to a small group, you know, because it's somehow a conservative format, you know what I mean? But I came to this question because for me it was a very interesting experience here, like hearing one after the other, you know, from a language that I don't understand at all to a language I think I fairly understand well, also with intonation, but not quite actually. Like the full meaning only like arose like really with you. And also it seems that you, Melisa, are a very experienced reader, because how you stress certain things, you know, so you really like at a certain point with the deceased wife, you know, I really began shaking, you know, because it was so deep, and this whole complexity of meaning that you put in your story, you know, that we had this topic of poetics and lyrics like really arrived, you know. So so basically this is the question. So what would be the ideal staging for you for a reading?
First me. Okay. I don't have any ideal place, or it doesn't. I think that space doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't count that much. It's always about people who are you talking to, and people who are listening, and this some kind of, you know, energy that is rising from the conversation. So for me, it doesn't matter. Is it, you know, space like this or forest or something like that, it's important the people who are attending the event. So, for you?
I think I would have to give some more thought to the idea of a space, but one thing that I will say is that I really appreciate that we read all three versions in their entirety, because I think what's much more common in a multilingual reading is to have one version read in its entirety and maybe just the first paragraph of the other languages, you know, to give you like a little taste in the other languages. And I think that format is usually the result of a perception that people can only tolerate listening to a language they don't understand for a very short period of time before they start to kind of tune out and get disinterested. And I feel very, very differently about that. I think, you know, because I think meaning is not just conveyed semantically, you know, it's like conveyed through sound. And so to me, it's a fascinating experience to be forced to listen to a language I don't understand for 5 minutes or something, because it really triggers my curiosity. I don't just I mean, if it's a boring reading or, you know, something, maybe I'll shut off. But, and so I really appreciate that we made the decision to hear them all in their full form. And obviously, since the stories are short, it was possible to do that. So I would say for a multilingual reading, that part of what we did here would definitely be an ideal that I would want to perpetuate. You know, just being able to hear languages sort of in concert with each other in that way is really nice.
Yeah, exactly. And because I read often my own poetry that were practiced in that where it comes from probably, and I will also read in more languages usually, and also Spanish, English, German, and so on. And I don't translate always, and I don't read all the translations. I just leave sometimes the poem be as it is, and I often get actually very good feedback that it's just nice to hear the sounds of a language, that you don't really have to understand everything, but they kind of get the mood, or they are curious about the sound, especially if they're not used to this language, or they're curious about how I'm changing, or now we were changing, and how does it sound, and maybe they understood 2 of the 3 versions, and every text, when it's translated, has its own character. It's the same text, but still it sounds different. So this is also for me very interesting how it sounds in different languages. So yeah, definitely better than just having fragments, because then you don't really get the story. And this is kind of a full experience. But go back to his question, I don't know if there is a perfect sign. You know, like she said, it depends on, you know, the mood and the people. And I think everything is possible. Reading in the forest, great, why not? If, you know, enough people will come and get interested, or, I don't know, read anywhere. I mean, it's experimenting, I think, because there's no recipe for anything, you know, this is my perfect way of doing stuff. You just kind of try out and see next time and learn along, and yeah, so, but yeah, reading in the forest would be cool. Maybe I do that one day. Good idea, Thomas. Thank you.
Well, today Thomas had another idea that is more delicious.
Okay.
To read inside of a tapik shop.
Tapik shop. Yeah,
so
carpet
this
shop.
person,
Okay.
Tapiks all around, and it's warm.
And they have those exhibitions in the first week.
Yeah.
It's like super snobby and
Yeah, in Persian carpet shop.
Well,
They
I
have
just
some exhibition.
attended, if you want, I just attended the concert in the forest at 8 a.m. in the morning. It's in the end of August, in the Alps, you know, so it's not.
your last reading was in a garage.
Yeah, it was in an old garage. It was a space that was supposed to they given it to like associations and artists to use before it gets torn down and built something new. So it's an old garage, and it's like used, all the parts are used with graffitis and I don't know, installations and so that was really cool. Yeah, in an old garage, that was a good experience. So you can basically do it anywhere, you know. So yeah. And maybe just for me, the most perfect thing is not doing the same thing, but always experiment.
That's right.
Yeah. But now I just to add one more thing, and I will finish. I don't know here or in US, but people in our region, they want events with artistic talks, but they are not patient enough for the reading. So as time goes by, I prefer these events when I can more read.
Yeah.
That's something that's interesting for me.
Yeah, but I think it's good both, you know, it's to sort of hear the text actually, and then meet the artist and hear, you know, the background of it, and because one without the other, I would miss something. Yeah, because it's different when you take a book and sit at home and read it by yourself, or when somebody's doing it, when reading it for you, it's completely different. Yeah. So next time you girls come, we do it in Wienerwald, in the forest. Okay. Well then, thank you all for coming. It was a lovely meeting. Thank you.